Picture a room in Rome. The year is somewhere around AD 65. The city still carries the smell of ash. Nero's fire burned 18 months ago, and whole neighborhoods never came back. What came back instead were the soldiers, the informants, the lists of names. The person sitting in this room is Jewish. They grew up with the Torah, with the Psalms, with the whole architecture of a faith that had held their people together for 1,000 years. Through Egypt, through Babylon, through every empire that had ever tried to crush them. They know the prayers. They know the feasts. They know which direction to face when they pray. They also know Jesus. They made that decision years ago. Maybe in a crowded courtyard, maybe beside a river, maybe in a room just like this one, listening to someone who had seen the risen Lord with their own eyes. They said yes. They meant it. But that was before the arrests, before the confiscations, before 2 of their closest friends disappeared into the Roman justice system and did not come back. And now, there is a decision sitting in the air of this room like smoke that will not clear. Down the street, the synagogue is still open. No soldiers outside it. No risk. The old prayers, the old feasts, the old sacrifices, all of it still running quietly under Roman tolerance. All this person has to do is walk back in, close this chapter, survive. And in their hands, a letter. No name on the outside. No greeting from a named apostle. Just words, beginning mid-argument, written by someone who clearly knows them, clearly loves them, and is clearly terrified they are about to make the worst decision of their lives. This is the book of Hebrews. It is not a theology textbook. It is not a commentary on Leviticus. It is not a book for people who have their faith figured out and want to go deeper. This is a crisis letter, written to a specific community of people who were one bad week away from walking away from Jesus forever. And whoever wrote it understood something that most readers miss entirely. The people receiving this letter were not walking away from faith. They were walking back into it, back into the synagogue, back into the sacrifices, back into the old covenant system they had grown up in. They were not becoming atheists. They were becoming tired. There is a line this unknown author chose to open with. Not a rebuke, not a warning, not a list of reasons to stay. They opened with something so vast, so sweeping, so quietly devastating in its implications, that when you understand what they were doing, it changes how you read every word that follows. We will come back to that opening line, because it is the key to the whole letter. But first, you need to understand who these people were, what they had already lost, and exactly how close they came to disappearing from history entirely. Here is a fact that has bothered scholars for nearly 2,000 years. Nobody knows who wrote Hebrews. Not with certainty. Not even close. The letter has no opening salutation, no Paul, an apostle of Christ Jesus, nothing. It simply begins. And the early church, which was usually quite good at tracking who wrote what, spent 3 centuries arguing about it and never reached a conclusion. Origen of Alexandria, one of the greatest biblical minds of the 3rd century, A man who read the New Testament in its original Greek the way you read the news. Origen looked at Hebrews, studied it carefully, and wrote words that have become perhaps the most honest sentence in the history of biblical scholarship. He said, "Who wrote the epistle? In truth, God alone knows." That was in the 3rd century. We are no closer now. The leading candidates are worth knowing because each one changes how you hear the letter. The Apostle Paul was the early favorite. His theology is everywhere in Hebrews, the argument about faith and covenant, and the fulfillment of the law. But the Greek is wrong. Paul's Greek in his other letters is urgent, compressed, sometimes grammatically rough. The Greek of a man thinking faster than he can write. The Greek of Hebrews is something else entirely. It is the most elegant, most rhetorically sophisticated Greek in the entire New Testament. Whoever wrote this was trained in classical rhetoric. They were brilliant in a way that is almost architectural. Every argument building on the last, every image earning its place. Apollos is a strong candidate. The book of Acts describes him as a learned man with a thorough knowledge of the scriptures, and specifically notes he was from Alexandria, the intellectual capital of the ancient world, where Jewish scholars had been translating and interpreting the Hebrew Bible into Greek for 300 years. Apollos would have had exactly the education this letter displays. Then there is Priscilla, a woman, a leader in the early church, named before her husband Aquila in several New Testament texts, which in the 1st century was not an accident. It was a signal of status. The argument that she wrote Hebrews and removed her name because a letter from a woman would not have been received. That argument has been made seriously by serious scholars. Origen himself did not rule it out. We do not know. And the not knowing is, strangely, part of the point. Here is what most people miss. The author of Hebrews is not arguing against Judaism. Read the letter without that assumption, and it changes everything. This is not an anti-Jewish polemic. This is a Jewish writer, steeped in Torah, in love with the Psalms, quoting the Hebrew Bible more than any other New Testament letter. This is someone who grew up in the same tradition as their readers, who understands it from the inside, who is not saying the old system was wrong. They are saying the old system was always pointing here. The tabernacle in the wilderness. The author calls it a shadow. The Levitical priesthood, a shadow. The animal sacrifices repeated year after year, a shadow. And a shadow is not a lie. A shadow is proof that somewhere nearby there is a solid thing casting it. The readers were tempted to return to the shadow. The author is trying to show them the solid thing. Now, who were these readers? The text gives us more than most people realize. Chapter 5, verse 12. Though by this time you ought to be teachers, you need someone to teach you the elementary truths of God's Word all over again. They have been believers long enough to be mature. They are not new converts. They are people who have been in the faith for years and have grown. The Greek word is nothroi, sluggish, dull. The word is used of a limb that has fallen asleep. They are not dead. They are numb. And chapter 10 tells us why. Verse 32. Remember those earlier days after you had received the light. when you endured in a great conflict full of suffering. They have already been through one wave of persecution. Property confiscated, friends imprisoned, public humiliation. They endured it once, when the faith was new and the fire was hot. But the fire has cooled, and now a second wave is coming. Tacitus, the Roman historian, writing about Nero's persecution after the Great Fire of AD 64, describes what was happening to Christians in Rome, covered in animal skins and torn apart by dogs, fastened to crosses and set alight to serve as torches in Nero's gardens at night. This is not metaphor. This is the world the recipients of Hebrews were living in. And they were tired. Stay with me. Because the author's response to their exhaustion is not what you expect. Count the word better in the book of Hebrews. Go ahead. Take your time. 13 times. In 13 chapters, the author uses that single comparative word 13 times. Better covenant, better promises, better sacrifice, better hope, better resurrection, better country, better priest. If you read Hebrews and miss that word, you have missed the spine of the entire argument. The author is not saying the old system was bad. They are saying there is something better. And better, in the logic of this letter, means the old system was always designed to be surpassed. Think about what that costs to say to this audience. These are people who grew up with the Torah, who learned the names of the priests before they learned to read, who understood that the entire architecture of Israel's worship, the tabernacle, the altar, the curtain, the ark, the high priest going once a year into the Holy of Holies with the blood of a bull, that all of this was not human invention. God designed it. God specified every cubit of the tabernacle's dimensions. God chose Aaron Raphael for the priesthood. God commanded the sacrifices. And now this letter arrives and says, all of that was a shadow. Not a mistake, not a detour, a shadow, which means it was always pointing toward a source of light. But if you are someone who has spent your entire life in the shadow, being told now to turn around and face, the light is not simple. It is disorienting. It can feel like loss. The author knows this. And so before they make the argument from logic, they make it from mystery. Enter Melchizedek. He appears in Genesis 14, 2 verses, almost a footnote. Abraham is returning from battle, and this figure meets him. Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of God Most High. He brings bread and wine. He blesses Abraham. Abraham gives him 1/10 of everything. And then he disappears. No origin story, no genealogy, no record of his birth, no record of his death. He simply appears, blesses the father of the entire Jewish nation, receives his tithe, and vanishes from the text for 1,000 years until Psalm 110 drops his name again in a single line. You are a priest forever, in the order of Melchizedek. But it gets stranger. The author of Hebrews looks at this figure, this priest with no beginning and no end recorded in Scripture, and says, this is what Jesus' priesthood looks like. Not Levitical, not inherited through Aaron's bloodline, not dependent on genealogy or law or annual repetition. a priesthood older than Moses, older than Aaron, older than the entire sacrificial system that the readers were tempted to return to. The argument is surgical. If Abraham, the father of the nation, the one the whole covenant rests on, if Abraham tithed to Melchizedek, then Melchizedek's order is greater than Abraham's descendants. And if the Levitical priests are Abraham's descendants, then the order of Melchizedek is greater than the Levitical priesthood, which means Jesus, serving in that older order, holds a priesthood that the entire Mosaic system was always subordinate to. You cannot go back to something greater by returning to something that was always the lesser. And then, chapter 11, verse 1. The author pauses the argument and defines the thing they are asking their readers to hold on to. The Greek word is hypostasis. We translate it confidence or assurance. Faith is the substance of things hoped for. But hypostasis in Greek philosophy means the structural foundation beneath visible reality. The thing standing under, the load-bearing wall behind the plaster. Faith, the author is saying, is not a feeling. It is not optimism. It is not whistling in the dark. Faith is the structural material the universe is built on. When everything visible shakes, when property is confiscated and friends are arrested, and the second wave of persecution is gathering on the horizon, what holds is not what you can see. What holds is what stands beneath. This is not a soft word for soft times. This is architecture language, engineering language. The author is telling a community of exhausted, frightened, numbing people. The foundation has not moved. You are the ones who have drifted. And that word, drifted, is the one that should stop you cold. The Greek is parahio, used of a ring sliding off a finger while you sleep. Used of a ship that was properly moored at sunset and is found at dawn 3 miles from the harbor. Not because anyone steered it away, but because nobody noticed it was moving. Nobody made a dramatic decision to leave. The rope simply frayed. The current simply pulled. And one morning you look up, and the shore you started from is gone. The author is not describing people who renounced their faith in a moment of crisis. They are describing people who drifted, slowly, quietly, while they were busy surviving. And this is where it gets remarkable. The author's prescription for drifting is not try harder. It is not shame yourself back to the dock. It is, look at what you are drifting away from. Really look. Look at the priest you have, who has gone not into an earthly holy of holies with the blood of bulls, but into the very presence of God with his own blood, once for all, permanently. Look at the covenant you are in, not written on stone tablets that crack and fade, but written, the author says, in chapter 8, on human hearts. Look at what the shadow was pointing to. Stop staring at the shore you came from. Turn around and see where the current is taking you. Before we go further, if you are finding this helpful, if this is the kind of content that makes you see a book you thought you knew in a completely different way, consider subscribing. There is more coming. And if you know someone who is in a hard season with their faith right now, someone who is tired and close to the edge, send this to them. This video might be exactly what they need to hear today. Now, Chapter 11. Most people call it the Hall of Faith. It is one of the most famous passages in the entire Bible. 39 verses listing the names of men and women who trusted God across the whole sweep of Israel's history. Abel, Enoch, Noah, Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Moses, Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, the prophets. And almost everyone who reads this chapter reads it as a highlight reel, a trophy case. The greatest hits of biblical faith. Look at these giants. Look at what they did. Now go and do likewise. That reading is not wrong, but it is incomplete. And what it misses is the thing that makes chapter 11 not inspiring but devastating, in the best possible way. Look at how the stories actually end. Abel, the first name on the list, the first person in the Bible commended for faith, was murdered by his brother for making the right offering. His reward for faith was death. Hebrews 11, verse 4 says, by faith, Abel brought God a better offering than Cain did. The next thing that happened to Abel was that Cain killed him in a field. Faith did not protect him. Faith got him killed. Abraham, the father of the nation, the man the entire covenant runs through, died in a tent. Chapter 11, verse 9. By faith he made his home in the promised land. Like a stranger in a foreign country, he lived in tents. He was given a promise about a land. He spent the rest of his life as a nomad in that land, owning none of it except the field he bought to bury his wife. He died before the promise was fulfilled. Hebrews says he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. He never saw it. He died looking. Moses, the greatest prophet in Israel's history, the man who stood before Pharaoh, who parted the Red Sea, who received the law on Sinai, never entered the promised land. He saw it from a mountain. He died on the wrong side of the Jordan River. And then, and this is the part that most Sunday school versions quietly skip, verse 35. The author shifts. Up to this point, the stories have been miraculous. Red Seas parting, walls falling, lions' mouths shut. But then the author writes, there were others who were tortured, refusing to be released, so that they might gain an even better resurrection. Some faced jeers and flogging, and even chains and imprisonment. They were put to death by stoning. They were sawed in two. They were killed by the sword. Sawed in two. That is not a metaphor. Jewish tradition records that the prophet Isaiah was killed this way, placed inside a hollow log and cut apart with a saw under the orders of King Manasseh. The author of Hebrews includes this, does not sanitize it, does not explain it away, just places it in the list right next to the Red Sea crossing, as if both are equally valid expressions of what faith looks like. And then, verse 37 ends with a line that should undo you. They wandered in deserts and mountains, living in caves and in holes in the ground. These are the heroes of faith. Most of them suffered. Most of them died without seeing the ending. The Hall of Faith is not a trophy case. It is a cemetery with flowers still on the graves. Here is the part nobody tells you. Verse 40. After naming all these people, all this suffering, All this faithfulness, all this dying, without receiving the promise. The author writes, "Since God had planned something better for us, so that only together with us would they be made perfect." Read that again slowly. Abraham is not complete without you. Moses is not complete without you. Every person in that list, every one of them who died looking forward to something they never saw, their story is not finished. It will not be finished until the whole thing is finished. Until the last runner crosses the line. Until the city they were looking for is finally built. You are not an afterthought in redemption history. You are the generation they were waiting for. Every one of those names in chapter 11, Abel, Abraham, Sarah, Moses, Rahab, they are waiting on you. Not because you are special, because the story is not over. And a story cannot end until every chapter is written. The author is telling a community of exhausted people, you cannot quit. Not because we need your performance, because they need your completion. The cloud of witnesses is not watching you fail. It is waiting for you to finish. Chapter 12 opens with the word therefore. In Greek, the word is toigeroon, and it only appears twice in the entire New Testament, both times in Hebrews. It is a stronger word than the English suggests. Not therefore like a casual logical connection. More like, in light of everything just said, this is now the only possible response. The author has spent 11 chapters building the case. Now they bring it home. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. The image is a Greek stadium, and you need to see it correctly, because the English translation flattens something that the original audience would have understood immediately, in their bones. In the ancient world, athletic competitions were not private events. They were civic religion. Tens of thousands of people filled the stone seats of stadiums across the Roman Empire to watch men run. The stadium at Corinth held up to 18,000 spectators. The Circus Maximus in Rome held 250,000. These were not casual gatherings. They were the defining cultural events of the age. Loud, packed, electric with crowd noise. And the author of Hebrews says, that is what surrounds you. Not metaphorically, not as a comforting image, as a structural reality. The cloud of witnesses, every person named in chapter 11, and more besides. They are not passive observers reading the results later. They are in the stands. And the Greek word for witnesses here carries the weight of people who have already testified, people who have already run this track in this same stadium and finished. They are not watching to see if you fail. They are there because they know what it takes, and they are for you. Now watch what happens next. The author tells the exhausted, frightened, numbing recipients of this letter to do two things. And both words in the Greek are violent. The first, aporhipto. We translate it, throw off. But the Greek is not gentle. It is the word used for a runner ripping a cloak from his body before a race. Not folding it neatly, not setting it aside, not gradually loosening it, hurling it. The kind of movement that leaves your hands empty and your shoulders free. and your body suddenly aware that there is nothing left to hold you back. The author is not asking for spiritual tidying. They are asking for the kind of decisive, physical, total rejection of dead weight that an athlete makes before the gun fires. The second, the word translated perseverance is hypomone, literally to remain under, not to push through, not to sprint harder, to stay, to endure the weight of the moment without collapsing under it. The greatest athletic achievement the author can imagine is not speed. It is not power. It is staying in the race when every part of you wants to walk off the track. And then, verse 3, the verse that contains the word eklio. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. Eklio, to become unstrung. The image is a bow, a weapon built around tension. The wood bent, the string drawn, the arrow ready. And eklio is what happens when the tension is gone. The bow is still there. It looks the same from the outside, but it cannot fire. It is useless as a weapon. It is just a curved piece of wood holding a loose string. The author is writing to people whose tension is gone, who look like believers from the outside. They know the prayers. They know the stories. They are still in the room. But something inside has gone slack. The persecution has worn them down to the point where they cannot fire. They are bows without tension, weapons that have forgotten what they were made for. This is not a motivational speech. This is not a performance review. This is not a guilt trip dressed up in athletic metaphor. This is a letter from someone who loves a community that is about to make the worst decision of their lives, and who is trying, with every rhetorical tool they possess, to say one thing clearly enough to be heard. You were made for this. Not in the sense that suffering is your destiny and you should enjoy it, but in the sense that you were designed, specifically, deliberately, with care, for exactly this kind of endurance. The race was marked out for you. Not a generic race, not the same race as everyone else. The Greek phrase is the race set before us, the one prepared in advance, with your name on it, your distance, your lane. And at the far end of that lane, the author says, fix your eyes here, is Jesus. Not as a distant finish line you may or may not reach, but as the archegos, the pioneer, the trailblazer, the one who ran first and is therefore running ahead of you on a path he already knows. And as the teleotes, the one who brings to completion what he starts. The author chose that word carefully. Jesus does not begin runners and lose interest. He does not start faith and abandon it halfway. He finishes what he begins. Including you. You are not finished. You are mid-race. The stands are full. The pioneer is ahead of you on the path. And the bow, even a bow that has gone slack, can be restrung. Before I show you how this letter ends, if this video has opened something up for you, if you have been sitting with a faith that has gone quiet and this is landing somewhere real, subscribe, leave a comment, tell me where you are. This channel exists for exactly that conversation. Now let me show you what the author does with their closing argument. Because it is not what you expect. The year is 1527. Not Rome, Wittenberg, Germany, Martin Luther is 43 years old. He has already been excommunicated by the most powerful institution in the Western world. He has already been declared an outlaw by the Holy Roman Emperor, meaning any person in the empire has the legal right to kill him without consequence. He has already spent months hiding in a castle while friends smuggled food to him. And word reached him that people were dying for ideas he had written, and now the plague has come to Wittenberg. Not a metaphor. The bubonic plague, the same disease that had killed a third of Europe 2 centuries earlier, has returned, and it is moving through Luther's city like fire through dry grass. His colleagues are fleeing. His university is evacuating. His closest friend, Philip Melanchthon, writes to him begging him to leave. Get out. Survive. You have done enough. The work will continue without you. Just go. Luther stays. He converts his home into a hospital. He and his wife Katharina take in the sick, the dying, the ones nobody else will touch. He writes letters. He preaches. He keeps working. And in the middle of all of it, surrounded by death, by exile, by the permanent possibility of his own arrest, he writes to a friend, I am in good health by God's grace, in spite of being surrounded by death. Historians who have studied Luther's spiritual life note something that rarely makes it into the popular biographies. Luther read Hebrews carefully, repeatedly. He cited chapter 12 specifically, the cloud of witnesses, the race, the pioneer, when he wrote about what stained him under persecution. The man who almost single-handedly fractured the religious monopoly of medieval Europe, who changed the course of Western civilization, who gave ordinary people the Bible in their own language, that man, in the hardest years of his life, was being held up by a letter written to people who almost quit. A letter that itself was written to hold up people who almost quit. That is how it works. That is how it has always worked now. The open loop. I told you at the beginning that there was an opening line. That the author, unknown, unnamed, writing in danger to people in danger, chose a specific way to begin this letter. Not with a rebuke, not with a warning, not with a list of reasons to stay. Here is what they wrote. Hebrews chapter 1 verse 1. In the past, God spoke to our ancestors through the prophets at many times and in various ways. Read that sentence again and hear what the author is doing. They are not dismissing the past. They are honoring it. God spoke through the prophets at many times in many ways, through visions and dreams and burning bushes and still small voices, and the law written on stone, and the Psalms written in grief. All of it was real. All of it was God. The author is standing with their readers inside the same tradition, looking at the same history, honoring the same story. And then, verse 2. One word changes everything. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son. But in these last days, the old revelations were not wrong. They were not failures. They were. The author has spent 13 chapters showing this. They were shadows, real shadows cast by a real object, pointing towards something the light was always building toward. And now the light has arrived, not in fragments, not in portions, not through intermediaries. The full word, the Son. The readers of this letter were tempted to walk away from the word and return to the echo, to leave the solid thing and go back to the shadow. And the author's opening line is not an argument against that. It is something quieter and more devastating. It is as a reminder, God has not gone silent. God has not abandoned you. God has not withdrawn into the old system and left you stranded in a new one with no support. God spoke. God is speaking. And what He said, what He is still saying, has a name. And that name went into the darkness of death and came back out the other side. And is therefore not afraid of whatever darkness you are currently sitting in. You are not being asked to give up your heritage. You are being asked to see where it was always going. The tabernacle was beautiful, but it was always a sketch. The sacrifices were real, but they were always a rehearsal. The high priest, once a year, behind the curtain, with the blood of a bull, that was always a preview. And previews, by definition, exist to make you want the main event. You have the main event, and you are standing in the lobby considering whether to go back outside. The author wrote this letter so you would turn around, walk back in, take your seat, and watch the thing the whole of history was always building toward finish what it started, including you, especially you. You, exhausted, frightened, numb, one bad week from walking away, you are not an asterisk in this story. You are the reason the letter exists. The unknown author stayed up late in a dangerous city, writing words they were not sure would survive the week, and those words survived 2,000 years, because somewhere across these 2,000 years, there would be a person sitting exactly where you are sitting right now, and they needed to hear this. Don't quit. Before I let you go, 3 things I want you to carry out of this video. The first is about the book itself. Hebrews was written in a specific crisis to specific people facing a specific temptation in a specific city at a specific moment in history. The author knew their names, knew their losses, knew exactly which arguments would land and which would not. This is not a timeless theological treatise dropped from the sky. It is a pastoral letter written with shaking hands to people the author loved and was terrified of losing. And that context does not shrink the letter. It does not make it smaller, or more limited or less applicable to your life. Context is not the enemy of meaning. Context is the key that unlocks meaning. When you understand who these people were, property confiscated, friends arrested, the second wave of persecution gathering on the horizon, every verse opens up, every argument lands harder, every image cuts deeper. You are not reading ancient religious history. You are reading a letter written to people who felt exactly what you have felt. And it held them. It can hold you. The second is about you. If you have ever been one bad week away from walking away from your faith, if you have ever sat in the dark, wondering whether any of this is worth what it costs, you are not outside the story of Hebrews. You are not a cautionary tale. You are not a failure who stumbled into the wrong chapter. You are exactly the person this letter was written for. The author did not write to the strong and settled. They wrote to the numb and the drifting, to the bows without tension, to the runners who had stopped running, to the people standing in the lobby of the greatest story ever told. Considering whether to go back outside, you are in the right place. The letter is for you. The cloud of witnesses is for you. The pioneer who ran the track before you ran it for you. You are not too far gone. You are mid-race. The third, and I want you to stay with this one, the author of Hebrews never signed their name. 2,000 years of scholarship. And we still do not know who wrote this letter. We do not know if they survived the persecution. We do not know if the community they wrote to held together or scattered. We do not know if they ever found out whether their words made a difference. But they wrote anyway. In a dangerous city, at a dangerous time, to people they loved, who were about to give up. They stayed up late and chose every word carefully and sent it out into the dark without knowing if it would arrive, without knowing if it would be read, without knowing if it would survive the week, let alone the century, let alone 2,000 years. It survived. You are watching it right now. And somewhere in that cloud of witnesses, that unnamed, unknown, brilliant, terrified, faithful writer is cheering. Not because you are impressive, not because you have it figured out, but because you are still here, still watching, still asking the question, still in the race. Which verse in Hebrews has held you when you wanted to quit? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. I want to know. And if nobody has told you this recently, and I mean this, the fact that you are still here, still seeking, still willing to sit with hard questions about faith and doubt and exhaustion, that is not weakness. That is hypostasis. That is the load-bearing foundation. That is faith doing exactly what the author said it does, standing under the weight of what you cannot yet see, sine, holding the structure together until the light arrives. For here we do not have an enduring city. We are looking for the city that is to come. Keep running.